Blood pooled around the scuffed hardwood floor, but the ruthless syndicate boss didn't blink. He only stared at the terrified, trembling woman huddled in the corner. She wasn't a glamorous supermodel. She was a plus-size accountant, wrapped in a cheap, oversized sweater, gasping for air. Her own fiancé had just sold her to the mob to save his pathetic life. But Dominic didn't pull the trigger. Instead, he stepped over the bleeding coward, pulled her against his chest, and growled 5 words that sealed her fate. Chloe Jenkins knew the exact amount of physical space she occupied in the world. At 280 pounds, she lived in a perpetual state of hyper-awareness. She knew precisely how dining chairs would creak under her weight, how strangers on the Chicago subway would subtly shift their bags to create a barrier, and how high-end boutiques practically banished her to the darkest, dustiest corners of their stores. Society had spent 30 years conditioning her to apologize simply for existing, but no one in her life made her feel smaller, more insignificant, or more utterly worthless than her fiancé, Ridge Perry. Ridge was a junior real estate broker, with a smile perfectly engineered to sell overpriced condos to naive buyers. He was lean, classically handsome, and possessed a silver tongue that had charmed Chloe 3 years ago, when she was drowning in the grief of losing her mother. Back then, Ridge had felt like a lifeline. He was the handsome man who had inexplicably chosen the fat girl. It was only later, after she had signed over the deed to her inherited childhood home and co-signed his endless business loans, that she realized she wasn't a partner to him. She was a resource, a bank, a punching bag for his ego. "You're lucky I'm with you, Chloe." Ridge would often say, his tone dripping with a terrifyingly casual cruelty, as he watched her struggle to zip up a dress. "Most guys in my firm wouldn't be caught dead walking into a gala with someone your size. I'm making sacrifices here." On a blistering, freezing Tuesday night in November, the reality of Ridge's sacrifices came crashing down their front door. Chloe had been in the cramped kitchen of their South Side apartment, scrubbing a cast-iron skillet, when the heavy oak door didn't just knock it splintered inward with a deafening crack. The wind howling off Lake Michigan rushed in, carrying with it the metallic, terrifying scent of impending violence. Chloe dropped the skillet. It clattered against the linoleum with a heavy thud, matching the sudden, violent hammering of her own heart. She peeked around the breakfast bar, her breath hitching in her throat. 3 men stood in the entryway. They did not look like the debt collectors who usually harassed Ridge over the phone. These men wore tailored charcoal wool coats that hung perfectly over broad shoulders, their postures rigid and impossibly disciplined. The 2 men flanking the doorway were massive, their hands resting casually inside their coat pockets. But it was the man in the center who pulled all the oxygen from the room. Dominic Moretti did not need to shout to command attention. He was an apex predator in a bespoke suit. Tall, with shoulders wide enough to block out the hallway light, his face was a jagged landscape of harsh angles, sharp jawlines, and a faded silver scar that ran from his left temple down to his cheekbone. His eyes, a shade of dark, frozen amber, swept over the cheap furniture of the apartment with mild disgust. "Ridge Perry," Dominic said. His voice was a low, gravelly baritone that vibrated through the floorboards. It wasn't a question. Ridge, who had been lounging on the sofa watching a basketball game, scrambled backward so violently that he flipped over the coffee table. His face drained of all color, leaving him looking like a panicked, sickly ghost. "Mr. Moretti Ridge choked out his hands, raising in an immediate gesture of surrender. "Dominic, please, you're early. We said Friday. The drop was supposed to be Friday. The drop was supposed to be last month." "Ridge," Dominic replied, taking a slow, measured step into the living room. His heavy leather shoes made no sound on the cheap rug. "Then it was 2 weeks ago." Then it was yesterday. My patience is not a revolving line of credit. You owe the family $600,000. The book is closed. I am here for the principal, the interest, or your life. Chloe pressed a trembling hand over her mouth, tasting the soapy water from the dishes. $600,000. Ridge had told her his business was just hitting a slight recession bump. He had sworn the second mortgage on her house was just for a legitimate marketing campaign. A freezing terror gripped her chest. This wasn't a bank. This was the Moretti Syndicate, the family that controlled half the ports and underground casinos in the Midwest. I have it. I will have it, Ridge stammered, crawling backward until his spine hit the drywall. He was sweating profusely, the charming real estate broker reduced to a whimpering, pathetic mess. A deal is closing next week. Commercial property downtown. The commission is massive. Dominic, I swear to God. God does not audit my ledgers, Dominic said softly. He snapped his fingers. The man to his right moved with terrifying speed. He crossed the room, grabbed Ridge by the collar of his expensive polo shirt, and hauled him to his feet before slamming him back against the wall. The impact rattled the framed photos on the shelves. A heavy, suppressed Glock 19 was suddenly pressed flush against the underside of Ridge's chin. "Wait, wait, wait!" Ridge screamed, tears instantly spilling down his cheeks. He thrashed like a caught fish, his eyes darting wildly around the room until they landed on the kitchen. Until they landed on Chloe. "Take her!" Ridge shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at the woman he had promised to marry. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. Dominic slowly turned his head, his cold amber eyes locking on to Chloe for the first time. She stood frozen by the counter, a heavy 280-pound woman in a faded, oversized grey sweater and sweatpants, her face pale, her hands shaking violently. She felt utterly exposed, grotesque in her vulnerability. "Excuse me," Dominic murmured, his voice dropping an octave, carrying a lethal edge. "She's got assets." Ridge babbled desperation, entirely erasing his humanity. "The house is in her name. She's got a spotless credit score, life insurance, a pristine retirement fund. She'll do whatever you want. Force her to sign it all over. Make her run drugs. Make her do your accounting. I don't care. She's a fat cow, but she's loyal. She works hard. Take her. Take everything she has just let me walk." Chloe's world completely shattered. The air vanished from the room. She had known Ridge was selfish. She had known he was cruel. But this? He was trading her life, mocking her body, stripping away her final shred of human dignity to save himself from a bullet he had earned. A profound, hollow agony ripped through her chest, entirely eclipsing her fear of the Mafia. The man who had slept beside her for 3 years had just offered her up like defective collateral. Tears welled in Chloe's eyes, hot and humiliating. She wrapped her arms around her heavy waist, trying to physically shrink into herself, trying to disappear. She waited for the mob boss to laugh. She waited for Dominic Moretti to look at her full figure, sneer in disgust, and put a bullet in both of them. Dominic stared at Chloe. He watched the tears spill over her flushed, round cheeks. He saw the way she wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hide a body that her own fiancé had just used as a punchline. He saw the sheer, unadulterated devastation of a woman realizing she was entirely unloved by the man she had protected. A dark, dangerous shadow passed over Dominic's face. He turned back to Ridge. "You are offering me your fiancé," Dominic said. The words were quiet, but the temperature in the room plummeted. "Yes," Ridge sobbed, mistaking Dominic's calm for agreement. "Take her. She's useless to me anyway. She'll sign the deed to the house tonight. It's worth at least 300 grand. That cuts the debt in half, right? You can work her for the rest." Dominic stepped closer to Ridge. "A man who hides behind a woman," the syndicate boss whispered, "is not a man. He is a disease." Dominic's hand moved faster than Chloe's eyes could track. He didn't draw a gun. He drew a heavy titanium combat knife from his belt and drove the hilt of it brutally into Ridge's sternum, cracking the bone. As Ridge gasped, doubling over, Dominic drew his own sidearm and fired a single suppressed shot directly into Ridge's right kneecap. Thwip! Crack! Ridge collapsed to the floor, emitting a blood-curdling, high-pitched scream, clutching his shattered leg as dark blood instantly soaked into the cheap rug. Chloe screamed, clapping her hands over her ears and squeezing her eyes shut, pressing her back against the kitchen cabinets. She waited for the second shot. She waited to die. Heavy, slow footsteps approached the kitchen. Chloe slid down the cabinets, her knees giving out, hitting the linoleum floor. She curled into a ball, weeping violently, entirely paralyzed by the trauma. "Look at me," a deep, rough voice commanded. Chloe shook her head, wildly sobbing, burying her face in her knees. "I will not ask twice. Look at me." Trembling uncontrollably, Chloe lifted her head. Dominic Moretti crouched in front of her. Up close, the sheer physical power of the man was overwhelming. He smelled of rain, expensive gunmetal and cedarwood. His suit was pristine, contrasting violently with the blood pooling in the next room. He looked at her tear-streaked, puffy face. He looked at her heavy frame shivering on the floor. There was no disgust in his amber eyes. There was only an intense, burning calculation. "Get up," Dominic instructed, holding out a large, calloused hand. "Please." Chloe stuttered, her voice cracking. I don't know anything about his business. I don't have the money. Please don't kill me. I do not kill women. I do not kill the innocent." Dominic said, his gaze never leaving hers. "Take my hand." Hesitantly terrified that it was a trick, Chloe reached out. Her small, plump hand was entirely engulfed by his. With shocking ease, Dominic pulled her to her feet, steadying her when her legs wobbled. "Dominic," Ridge screamed from the living room, choking on his own pain. "Take the bitch and go. We're square, we're square." Dominic's jaw clenched. The muscles in his neck jumped. He pulled Chloe slightly behind him, shielding her body with his massive frame. He looked down at the pathetic, bleeding man on the floor. "The debt remains. Perry," Dominic said coldly. "The interest just doubled. My men will be back in exactly 10 days. If you do not have my money, I will not shoot your other knee. I will remove your head and mail it to your parents." "But I gave her to you," Ridge cried, pointing a bloody finger at Chloe. "I gave you the fat bitch." Dominic drew his gun again, aiming it perfectly at Ridge's groin. "Speak to her like that again, and you die right now." Ridge slammed his mouth shut, whimpering in agony. Dominic holstered his weapon. He turned slightly, wrapping a strong, warm arm tightly around Chloe's trembling shoulders. He pulled her flush against his side. The contrast was stark. The hardened, lethal mafia don and the terrified plus-size accountant. "You are my wife now." The ruthless mafia boss growled, his voice carrying effortlessly over Ridge's pathetic sobs, protecting the terrified fat girl from the monster who was supposed to love her. "She belongs to the Moretti family. If you or anyone else ever speaks her name without respect, if you ever look in her direction again, I will bury you alive under the foundation of your own office building. Do you understand me?" Ridge, pale and on the verge of passing out from blood loss, nodded frantically. "Let's go," Dominic said to Chloe, his tone instantly shifting from a lethal threat to a firm, quiet command. Where are we going?" she whispered, completely in shock. "Away from the trash," Dominic replied. He didn't drag her. He guided her, his arm a heavy protective weight around her shoulders, leading her out of the apartment, past the two silent enforcers, and into the freezing Chicago night. The drive to Lake Forest was a blur of neon city lights and suffocating silence. Chloe sat in the back of the armored SUV, her hands tightly clasped in her lap. She felt entirely displaced from reality. Her mind was struggling to process the last 20 minutes. Her fiancé had betrayed her. A mafia boss had shot him. And that same mafia boss had just declared her his wife. She covertly glanced at Dominic, who sat beside her. He was scrolling through a secure tablet, his face illuminated by the harsh blue light. He didn't look like a man who had just claimed a bride. He looked like a CEO reviewing a quarterly report. Chloe swallowed hard, finding her voice. "Mr. Moretti." He turned off the tablet, giving her his full attention. "Dominic, Dominic," she corrected her voice, trembling. "Why did you do that? Why did you say what you said to keep you alive?" Dominic answered bluntly. "And to keep him away from you. Ridge is a cornered rat. Rats bite when they panic. If I simply took your house deed, he would hunt you down to punish you for his own failures. By claiming you as mine, I placed you under the absolute protection of my syndicate. No one in this city will dare look at you twice." "But why?" Chloe whispered, a tear escaping her eye. "Look at me. I'm nobody. I'm fat. I'm ordinary. I have nothing to offer a man like you. Why would you protect me?" Dominic's eyes darkened. He leaned forward slightly. "You need to understand something, Chloe. The world I operate in is filled with beautiful, slim, perfect-looking people who would stab their own mothers for a 10% cut of a casino skim. Physical perfection is cheap. It can be bought. Loyalty, resilience, the kind of quiet endurance I saw in your eyes when that coward betrayed you. That is rare. My mother was a saint who was beaten by a man much like your fiancé. I made a vow a long time ago that I would not tolerate abusers in my presence." He leaned back, adjusting his cuffs. "As for the wife comment, it serves a dual purpose. My family elders, the Commission, have been pressuring me to marry to stabilize my image as Don. They keep throwing dangerous, venomous mafia princesses at me. Having a civilian wife, someone entirely removed from the life, solves my political problem. In return, your debts are cleared, your house is paid off, and you will never have to fear Ridge Perry again." Chloe stared at him, her mind spinning. It was a business transaction. Cold, calculated, but undeniably protective. She wasn't a hostage. She was a strategic asset he was choosing to shield. The SUV turned off the main road, passing through massive wrought-iron gates, flanked by armed guards. They drove up a long, winding driveway, surrounded by ancient oak trees, finally stopping in front of a sprawling, magnificent limestone estate. When they stepped inside, Chloe felt even more out of place. The foyer was adorned with imported marble classical art and vaulted ceilings. She stood awkwardly in her cheap sweatpants, hyper-aware of her size, in the grand, elegant space. Dominic noticed her discomfort immediately. He didn't draw attention to it. He simply gestured to an older, warm-looking woman walking down the grand staircase. "Maria," Dominic said. "This is Chloe. She will be staying with us. Please prepare the master guest suite and have the kitchen bring her whatever she wants. She's had a long night." "Of course, Mr. Moretti." Maria smiled warmly at Chloe. "Come with me, dear." As Chloe followed Maria up the stairs, she looked back. Dominic was already on his phone, barking orders about securing the docks. He had saved her life, claimed her, and immediately gone back to work. Over the next few weeks, Chloe's life transformed into a surreal, gilded cage. She was given unrestricted access to the estate. Tailors were brought in to measure her for clothes. For the first time in her life, someone wasn't trying to squeeze her into garments designed for smaller women. They were crafting luxurious, beautiful fabrics, specifically to fit and flatter her exact curves. Dominic was mostly absent during the days running his empire, but every evening without fail he returned to have dinner with her. They sat at opposite ends of a massive mahogany table at first, but by the second week Dominic had moved his chair to sit directly across from her. They talked, really talked. Chloe found herself explaining the intricate, boring details of corporate forensic accounting, expecting him to tune out. Instead, Dominic asked sharp, intelligent questions. He respected her mind. He never made a single disparaging comment about what she ate or how she looked. When she nervously opted for a small salad one night, hyper-aware of her weight, Dominic had quietly pushed a plate of rich, handmade truffle pasta toward her. "You do not need to shrink yourself in my house, Chloe," he had said, his voice a low rumble. "Eat what you enjoy. You are safe here." The spark between them grew slowly built on a foundation of profound safety and mutual respect. Chloe started to smile again. Her chronic anxiety began to fade. She was beginning to realize that the terrifying mafia boss was the safest man she had ever known. But while Chloe was healing, the hard karma of the outside world was beginning to twist into something ugly. Across the city, Ridge Perry was drowning. He had survived the gunshot, but his leg was permanently crippled, requiring him to use a heavy cane. Stripped of Chloe's assets and entirely bankrupted by medical bills and lost commissions, his desperation turned rancid. The Moretti deadline had passed. Ridge knew Dominic would send men to kill him. In a move born of pure vindictive malice and terror, Ridge sought out the only people who hated Dominic Moretti as much as he did. He limped into a dive bar in the Southside Irish district, a place strictly controlled by the O'Connor syndicate. Arthur the Bull. O'Connor sat in the back booth, chewing on a cheap cigar. He was a brutal old-school gangster who had been losing territory to Dominic for 3 years. "Give me one reason I shouldn't chop you to pieces for walking in here, Perry," Arthur growled, surrounded by his heavily armed crew. "Because I know Dominic Moretti's weakness," Ridge sneered, his face twisted in a bitter, ugly snarl. "He took my fiancée. He's hiding her at his Lake Forest estate. He's obsessed with her. She's his new wife. If you want to break the Moretti empire, you don't go after his money. You take the fat bitch he's protecting. I'll give you the blueprints to the estate's security system. I sold the property to the previous owner." Arthur paused, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his scarred face. The wheels of hard karma were spinning, but Ridge had no idea that aligning with monsters would ensure his own spectacular destruction. Arthur the Bull. O'Connor blew a thick cloud of acrid cigar smoke across the splintered surface of the dive bar table. He dragged a massive calloused finger over the faded blueprints of the Lake Forest estate, his pale blue eyes narrowing in predatory calculation. Across from him, Ridge Perry leaned heavily on his aluminum cane, sweating through a cheap windbreaker. The former hotshot real estate broker looked like a cornered, rabid animal, his handsome features completely warped by pain paranoia and a festering, venomous hatred. The old owner put in a hard-wired bypass for the perimeter sensors right here near the Eastern Service entrance. Ridge said, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and eager malice as he pointed a shaking finger at the schematic. "Dominic might have upgraded the cameras, but the foundation wiring is the same. I know it is. You cut the main line here. The backup generators take exactly 90 seconds to kick in. 90 seconds of complete darkness. It's enough time to get your strike team inside the main foyer." Arthur stared at Ridge, a look of profound disgust washing over his heavy, scarred face. In the brutal, unforgiving world of the Chicago underworld, there was a twisted code of honor. You killed for territory, you killed for money, and you killed for revenge." But Arthur looked at the pathetic limping man before him and saw only a parasite. "You sold your own fiancée to save your miserable skin." Arthur rumbled his thick Irish brogue, coating the words like gravel. "And now you're handing over the man who bought her debt. You're a special breed of scum, Perry. Why do you even care? You're free of the Moretti debt. Take a bus to Ohio and disappear." "Because he took what was mine," Ridge spat, slamming his fist on the table, though the impact made him wince as a jolt of pain shot up his ruined leg. "He humiliated me. He took my house, he shattered my knee, and he's keeping that fat cow wrapped in luxury while I live in a motel room that smells like bleach and desperation. I want my life back. I want Dominic dead. And I want to see the look on Chloe's face when I drag her out of that mansion." Arthur chuckled a dark, humorless sound. He didn't care about Ridge's bruised ego or his sick obsession with punishing a woman he had actively abused. All Arthur cared about was the golden opportunity sitting in his lap. Dominic Moretti was notoriously paranoid, surrounded by an impenetrable wall of loyal muscle. But a 90-second blind spot in his home fortress, that was the key to toppling the king. "All right, Perry," Arthur said, signaling to the heavily armed men lurking in the shadows of the bar. "You ride with the breach team tonight. You want to see the Don fall. You get a front row seat." Miles away, oblivious to the impending violence, the atmosphere inside the Lake Forest estate was a stark, beautiful contrast. Chloe Jenkins stood in front of a massive gilded floor-length mirror in the master suite, staring at her reflection in absolute awe. For the first time in her 30 years of life, she did not immediately catalogue her flaws. She didn't pinch her stomach or mentally wish away the width of her hips. She was wearing a custom-tailored, deep emerald green silk dress. The tailor Dominic had hired was a master of his craft. The fabric didn't hide her body, it celebrated it. The dress draped elegantly over her heavy curves, cinching perfectly at her waist and cascading gracefully to the floor. The rich color made her skin glow, and her hair, freshly styled by a professional team Dominic had quietly arranged, fell in soft, voluminous waves over her shoulders. She looked regal. She looked beautiful. The heavy mahogany door clicked open, and Dominic stepped into the room. He froze. He was wearing his usual impeccably tailored dark suit, the jacket unbuttoned, looking every inch the ruthless syndicate boss. But as his amber eyes landed on Chloe, the hardened, lethal edge of his demeanor completely melted away. The silence stretched thick and charged with an electric tension that made Chloe's breath hitch. Maria said we were having dinner in the formal dining room tonight," Chloe stammered, suddenly feeling a spike of her old anxiety. She smoothed her hands over the silk, her cheeks flushing red. "Is it too much I can change into the grey sweater? I know I take up a lot of space in a dress like this." "Stop," Dominic commanded, gently, his voice, a low, vibrating rumble that commanded immediate obedience without a trace of cruelty. He crossed the room with slow, deliberate steps until he was standing just inches from her. He reached out his large, calloused hand, a hand that had ended lives and commanded empires, cupping her cheek with shocking tenderness. His thumb lightly traced the soft curve of her jaw. "Do not ever apologize for the space you occupy, Chloe," Dominic said softly, his eyes burning with an intensity that pinned her to the spot. "You are not too much. You have never been too much. You are magnificent." Tears pricked the corners of Chloe's eyes. "Dominic, this was supposed to be a business arrangement, a political shield for you. You don't have to pretend." "I do not pretend," he replied, stepping even closer, his chest brushing against hers. "I brought you here to protect you, yes, But I kept you by my side because in a world full of vipers, you are the only honest, beautiful thing I have ever known. I look at you, Chloe, and I see a queen. I see my wife. He leaned down, his gaze dropping to her lips. Chloe's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She tilted her chin up, entirely surrendering to the pull of gravity between them. When Dominic kissed her, it wasn't a tentative, polite brush of lips. It was acclaiming. It was deep, possessive, and entirely consuming. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her heavy, soft body flush against his hard, muscular frame, letting her feel exactly how much he desired her. Chloe gasped into his mouth, her hands tentatively coming up to grip the lapels of his suit jacket. For the first time, she felt entirely cherished, entirely safe, and entirely loved. But the universe, cruel and unforgiving, chose that exact moment to shatter their peace. Click. The lavish crystal chandeliers overhead instantly died. The ambient hum of the estate's climate control ground to a halt. The room was plunged into absolute suffocating darkness. Dominic broke the kiss instantly. The tender, loving man vanished in a microsecond, replaced entirely by the apex predator. He shoved Chloe behind him, his hand already smoothly drawing the heavy, suppressed Glock from his shoulder holster. "The backup generators," Chloe whispered, panic spiking in her chest. "Why aren't they turning on?" "Because someone cut the hard line before the switch." Dominic growled his eyes, scanning the darkness. The shadows of the moonless night bled through the windows, which means they have the old blueprints. Before Chloe could process the horror of what that meant, the muffled, heavy thwip-thwip-thwip of suppressed gunfire echoed from the first floor, followed by the shattering of expensive glass. The estate had been breached. "Shoes off!" Dominic ordered, his voice a sharp, clinical whisper. "They make too much noise on the hardwood. Move!" Chloe didn't hesitate. She kicked off her heels, the adrenaline instantly overriding her fear. She was terrified, but she trusted the man standing in front of her with her very soul. Dominic grabbed her hand in a vice-like grip, leading her out of the master suite and into the pitch-black hallway. The air already smelled faintly of ozone and burning cordite. "Maria." Chloe gasped quietly as they moved toward the secondary staircase. "Is she?" "Maria sleeps in the west wing. The panic room in the basement automatically locks down from the inside when the perimeter fails. She is safe," Dominic replied smoothly, his eyes darting toward every shadow his weapon raised. "My men are outside, but they are pinned by the initial assault. We need to reach the library. There is a reinforced steel door and a weapons cache." They descended the back stairs silently. The darkness was absolute, save for the faint, sweeping beams of tactical flashlights cutting through the grand foyer below. Arthur O'Connor's men were moving through the house like a pack of hunting dogs, executing a precise sweep and clear maneuver. "Check the east wing," a gruff voice echoed through the marble halls. "The bull wants Moretti alive, but shoot anyone else you see." Dominic pulled Chloe tight against his chest, pressing her back against the cool plaster of the hallway wall just outside the library. He peeked around the corner. 3 heavily armed men in tactical gear were advancing down the corridor, their laser sights sweeping the expensive artwork. Dominic didn't wait for them to find him. He stepped out of cover with terrifying liquid grace. Thwip, thwip, thwip. 3 suppressed shots rang out in less than a second. The 3 enforcers dropped to the floor, instantly neutralized before they could even squeeze their triggers. It was a display of lethal efficiency that reminded Chloe exactly who the man she had just kissed truly was the most dangerous don in the Midwest. "Go," Dominic whispered, shoving the heavy oak door of the library open. Chloe hurried inside, moving past the towering bookshelves. Dominic followed, but before he could slam the door shut and engage the steel reinforcements, A harsh, painfully familiar voice echoed from the end of the hall. "Don't shut the door, Dominic, or I tell them to burn the whole house down with you in it." Chloe froze, the blood turning to ice in her veins. She peered around Dominic's broad shoulder. Stepping over the bodies of the fallen enforcers was Ridge Perry. He looked ghastly in the beam of the flashlights held by the 4 massive O'Connor hitmen flanking him. His face was pale, sweaty, and twisted into a grotesque, triumphant sneer. He leaned heavily on his cane, a cheap pistol trembling in his free hand. "Ridge!" Chloe breathed utter disbelief, warring with a sickening wave of revulsion. "Surprised to see me, Chloe?" Ridge mocked, his voice echoing in the grand hallway. "I told you I was going to get my life back. You thought you could just steal my house, hide behind a mob boss, and play dress-up like you're some kind of mafia queen. Look at you, squeezed into a dress that costs more than my car. You're still just a fat, pathetic joke." Dominic's posture shifted. The cold, calculating, tactical mindset evaporated, replaced by a volcanic, terrifying rage. His finger tightened on the trigger of his Glock. "I warned you, Perry!" Dominic growled, his voice echoing like rolling thunder down the corridor. "I told you what would happen if you ever spoke to her again. You're not in a position to make threats, Moretti." Ridge screamed, practically vibrating with manic, misplaced confidence. "The O'Connors have the estate surrounded. Your guards are dead or pinned. Put the gun down, hand over the deed to my house, and give me the girl. Arthur might let you live if you beg." "You think this is about a house?" Dominic said, softly, almost to himself. He stepped fully into the doorway, completely blocking Chloe from view, exposing his entire body to the 4 hitmen. "You are an insect. Shoot him!" Ridge shrieked, pointing his trembling gun at Dominic. The hallway erupted in a deafening roar of unsuppressed gunfire. Dominic moved faster than humanly possible. He didn't dive for cover. His sole focus was ensuring not a single stray bullet came near the library. He stood his ground in the doorway, returning fire with lethal mechanical precision. 2 of the O'Connor hitmen went down instantly, bullets piercing their tactical vests. But there were too many. A heavy-caliber round shattered the doorframe next to Dominic. A split second later, another round tore directly through Dominic's left shoulder. The impact violently spun the massive mafia boss around. Blood exploded from his shoulder, splattering against the oak door. He grunted, dropping to one knee, his left arm immediately hanging uselessly at his side. "Dominic!" Chloe screamed, pure, unadulterated terror ripping from her throat. She didn't cower. She didn't hide behind the bookshelves. The docile, terrified woman who had wept on a kitchen floor weeks ago was gone, burned away by the love she felt for the bleeding man in front of her. Chloe lunged forward. She grabbed the collar of Dominic's suit jacket with both hands, using every ounce of her heavy body weight and strength to haul him backward into the library. As he fell back over the threshold, Chloe slammed her hand against the emergency lockdown panel on the wall. Thick, solid steel plates instantly shot down from the ceiling, slamming over the windows, and the doorway sealing them inside a bulletproof vault, just as a fresh hail of gunfire sparked uselessly against the exterior metal. The library was plunged into the dim red glow of the emergency backup lighting. Dominic lay on the Persian rug, breathing heavily, his right hand still gripping his weapon, his left shoulder a ruined, bleeding mess. Chloe dropped to her knees beside him, uncaring as the dark blood soaked into the beautiful emerald silk of her dress. Her hands shook violently as she pressed them firmly against his shoulder wound, trying to stem the flow. "You idiot!" Chloe sobbed, tears streaming down her face. "You stood in the doorway. You didn't even try to hide. You let them shoot you." Dominic let his head fall back against the floor, a grim, pain-laced smile touching his lips. He reached up with his good hand, his bloodied fingers gently brushing a stray tear from her cheek. "I told you." Dominic rasped, his breathing shallow, but his amber eyes burning with unyielding devotion. "I protect what is mine. You are my wife. I would take 1,000 bullets before I let that coward lay a finger on you." Outside the steel door, they could hear the muffled, panicked shouting of Ridge Perry as the reality of the situation finally set in. "They're locked in," Ridge yelled. "Blow the door. We have to get in there." "Shut up, you fool!" one of the surviving O'Connor men roared. "Listen." Through the thick steel, the sound was faint but unmistakable. The distant, rhythmic thwip, thwip, thwip of suppressed gunfire, accompanied by the heavy thundering sound of diesel engines roaring up the driveway. Dominic's grim smile widened slightly as he looked at Chloe. "Ridge thought he knew my security system. He forgot that a Don never relies solely on machines. The Moretti Syndicate reinforcements had arrived. The O'Connor men were trapped inside the house, caught between the steel walls, and an army of merciless, highly trained enforcers. The hard karma Ridge had sought was finally closing its jaws around him. The red emergency lights bathed the reinforced library in a hellish, pulsing glow. Outside the heavy steel plates, the muffled sounds of a one-sided slaughter raged through the opulent corridors of the Lake Forest estate. The initial tactical silence of the O'Connor hitmen had been entirely shattered by the deafening, unsuppressed roar of the Moretti Syndicate's elite guard. It was not a firefight. It was an extermination. Inside the vault, Chloe's entire universe had narrowed to the ruined, bleeding shoulder of the man lying on the Persian rug. Her emerald silk dress, once a symbol of her newfound confidence, was heavily stained with dark, spreading crimson. Her hands were slippery with his blood, but she pressed down with all her weight, her soft, heavy body acting as an anchor to keep him tethered to consciousness. "Keep your head down," Dominic rasped, his voice strained but impossibly calm. Even with a bullet torn through his flesh, his right hand never wavered. The barrel of his Glock pointed steadily at the steel door. "When Matteo gives the clear code, you step behind me. I am not hiding behind a man who is bleeding to death." Chloe sobbed, though her voice carried a fierce, unyielding edge that surprised them both. "I am staying right beside you." Dominic's amber eyes flickered up to her tear-streaked face. In the crimson emergency lighting with blood on her hands and fire in her eyes, she did not look like the terrified accountant he had rescued weeks ago. She looked magnificent. She looked like a Moretti. Outside, the gunfire abruptly ceased. The sudden ringing silence was more terrifying than the noise. Then came the heavy, desperate thud of fists pounding against the exterior steel plates. "Let me in. Please, God, Dominic, open the door." Ridge Perry's voice was completely stripped of its earlier arrogant venom. It was the high-pitched, warbling shriek of a man watching the Grim Reaper walk down the hallway. "They're dead. Arthur's men are all dead, Dominic. They're going to kill me, Chloe. Chloe, please tell them not to shoot me." Chloe stopped breathing. A cold, profound numbness settled over her chest. The man who had abused her, who had mocked her body, who had sold her to the mob, and who had just tried to orchestrate her murder, was now weeping like a terrified child, begging her for salvation. A sharp, rhythmic series of knocks struck the steel. 2 fast, 1 slow, 3 fast. "Boss!" A deep, gruff voice called out. "It's Matteo. The house is purged. We have the rat." Dominic let out a slow, measured breath. He painfully holstered his weapon and looked up at Chloe. "Press the release." Chloe hesitated for a fraction of a second before reaching up and slamming her blood-slicked palm against the control panel. With a heavy mechanical groan, the steel plates retracted into the ceiling. The heavy oak doors were pulled open from the outside. The corridor was a war zone. Smoke hung thick in the air, illuminated by the sweeping tactical flashlights of 24 heavily armed Moretti enforcers. The bodies of the O'Connor strike team littered the marble floors, but directly in the center of the carnage, forced onto his knees, with 2 assault rifles pressed against the back of his skull, was Ridge. His cheap windbreaker was soaked in the blood of the men he had led to their deaths. His aluminum cane was snapped in half a few feet away. When he saw the doors open, he practically collapsed forward, sobbing hysterically. "Dominic, I'm sorry I was out of my mind. Arthur made me do it." Ridge babbled, his eyes wide with absolute suffocating terror. He looked past the bleeding Mafia boss and locked eyes with the woman he had tormented for years. "Chloe, baby, please tell him we have history. Tell him I loved you. I'm sick. I need help. I didn't mean any of this." Dominic struggled to his feet, refusing Matteo's offered hand. He swayed slightly, but his sheer, terrifying willpower kept him upright. He stepped out of the library, his boots crunching on broken glass, and looked down at the pathetic creature groveling on his floor. "You brought mercenaries into my home," Dominic said, his voice a lethal vibrating whisper that carried effortlessly through the silent hallway. "You fired upon my family. You threatened my wife." "She's not your wife," Ridge shrieked, panic eroding his sanity. "She's nothing. She's a fat, ugly loser I felt sorry for. She—" Before the enforcers could strike him, Chloe stepped over the threshold. She did not cower. She did not wrap her arms around her waist to hide her heavy curves. She stood to her full height, the blood-stained emerald silk draped over her formidable figure like the armor of a warrior queen. She walked slowly toward Ridge, stopping just inches from where he kneeled. Ridge looked up at her, a glimmer of desperate hope flashing in his eyes. "Chloe, please. Save me. I'll do anything. I'll make it up to you." Chloe looked down at him. She searched her heart for the anxiety, the inadequacy, and the fear he had meticulously implanted there for 3 years. She found absolutely nothing. "You are a very small, very sad little man, Ridge," Chloe said, her voice perfectly steady, echoing with a quiet, devastating authority. "I spent years shrinking myself to make you feel big. I starved myself, I hated myself, and I paid your debts because I thought I was unlovable. But looking at you now, crying in another man's blood because you're too weak to fight your own battles, I don't pity you. I don't even hate you. You are just nothing." Ridge's jaw dropped. The profound, unshakable finality in her voice broke whatever pathetic delusion he was clinging to. Chloe turned her back on him, walking to Dominic's side and gently wrapping her arm around his waist to support his injured side. She didn't look back at Ridge again. Dominic's amber eyes burned with absolute, unadulterated worship as he looked at Chloe. Then he turned his gaze back to Ridge, and the warmth vanished, replaced by the freezing void of the abyss. "Matteo," Dominic ordered softly. "Yes, boss." "Take him to the meatpacking district. The basement," Dominic commanded. "Do not give him the mercy of a quick death. I want him to spend the rest of his very long, very painful life realizing the exact magnitude of his mistake. Make sure he remembers her name with every breath he has left. No, wait. Dominic Chloe." Ridge's screams tore through the hallway as Matteo and another massive enforcer grabbed him by the arms, dragging him backward through the shattered foyer. His fingernails clawed desperately at the marble floor, but he was entirely powerless. The hard karma he had set into motion had finally arrived, dragging him screaming into the dark. 6 months later, the Chicago skyline glittered like a sea of diamonds against the velvet night sky. Inside the exclusive, heavily guarded penthouse of the Moretti Tower, the elite of the city's underworld and its corrupt upper crust were gathered to pay their respects. The war with the O'Connor Syndicate had been brief and brutally decisive. After the failed raid on the Lake Forest estate, Dominic had unleashed the full, terrifying might of his empire. Arthur O'Connor was dead, his territory absorbed, and his lieutenants scattered to the wind. Dominic Moretti was now the undisputed king of the Midwest, his power absolute. But tonight was not a celebration of blood or territory. Tonight was a celebration of power of a different kind. Dominic stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, a glass of expensive bourbon in his hand. His left shoulder still carried a wicked scar, a permanent reminder of the night his empire had almost burned. He wore a custom midnight blue tuxedo, looking every inch the ruthless, untouchable Don. Yet his amber eyes were not scanning the room for threats. They were entirely captivated by the woman standing across the room. Chloe Jenkins, now legally and truly Chloe Moretti, was holding court. She was breathtaking. She wore a custom-designed off-the-shoulder gown, spun from dark ruby velvet, that hugged every lush, heavy curve of her body, before flaring out into a dramatic train. Her hair was swept up in an elegant, intricate style, adorned with subtle diamond pins that caught the chandelier light. She was surrounded by the wives of the commission bosses and powerful politicians, speaking with a calm, radiant confidence that commanded absolute respect. The women who might have once whispered cruel things about her size were now hanging on her every word, desperate for the favor of the Don's formidable wife. A silver-haired commission boss, a man known for his brutal old-world prejudices, approached Dominic, following his gaze. "She is a revelation, Dominic," the older man murmured respectfully. "When you first claimed her, there were whispers. They said she was too soft, too out of place for our world. They said she lacked the aesthetic of a traditional syndicate wife. But she handled the estate accounts, she stabilized the front companies, and she stared down Arthur's men without blinking. You found a diamond in the rough." "She was never in the rough," Dominic replied, his voice a low, warning rumble that made the older man stiffen. "The world was simply too blind to see her value. And anyone who ever whispered about her aesthetic will find their tongues removed. Is that understood?" Perfectly, Don Moretti. My apologies." The boss stammered quickly, bowing his head and retreating into the crowd. Dominic set his glass down and walked across the ballroom. The sea of dangerous men and glamorous women parted for him instantly, a physical manifestation of his supreme authority. But he ignored them all. He walked straight to Chloe, smoothly wrapping a strong arm around her waist and pulling her heavy, warm body flush against his side. "Are these vultures boring you, my love?" Dominic asked softly, pressing a kiss to her temple. Chloe smiled, leaning into his touch, feeling the solid, unyielding strength of the man who had completely reshaped her reality. "They're just trying to figure out how the fat girl from the South Side ended up running the most profitable legitimate logistics firm in your empire." "They will never figure it out," Dominic growled playfully, his eyes darkening with desire as he looked down at her. "Because they do not possess your mind, your resilience, or your heart. You are the sole reason this empire stands strong." He took her hand, leading her away from the crowd, and out onto the private glass-enclosed balcony overlooking the sprawling, neon-lit city. The noise of the gala faded into a soft hum behind the thick acoustic glass. The night air was cool, but Chloe didn't shiver. She had never felt safer in her entire life. Dominic turned to face her, taking both of her hands in his. The ruthless, calculating mob boss melted away, leaving only a fiercely devoted man. "6 months ago, I told a pathetic coward that you were my wife to save your life," Dominic said, his voice thick with emotion. "It was a tactical lie, but it became the greatest truth of my existence. I do not just want to protect you, Chloe. I want to build the world around you. I want to spend the rest of my days making sure you never doubt your worth for a single second." Chloe looked up at him, tears of profound, overwhelming joy shimmering in her eyes. The terrified, broken woman she used to be felt like a distant, faded memory. She had been forged in fire, protected by a monster who loved her, and emerged as a queen. "You already have Dominic," she whispered, reaching up to trace the faded scar on his cheek. "You didn't just save my life. You gave me the courage to actually live it." Dominic pulled her against him, his large hands resting possessively on her wide hips. He leaned down, his lips brushing against hers. "You are my wife now," the Ruthless Mafia boss growled, but this time the words carried no threat, no tactical calculation. They carried only an eternal, unbreakable vow. "And you will be my queen forever." As their lips met in a deep, consuming kiss beneath the glittering Chicago skyline, the shadows of their pasts were finally and permanently erased, leaving only the unyielding light of a love that had conquered the darkness. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more intense, dramatic stories. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Did you love seeing Chloe embrace her power and put Ridge in his place? Do you think Dominic's brutal punishment for Ridge was deserved, or did he go too far? Drop a comment below with your favorite moment from the story, and let us know what kind of romance drama you want to hear next. Thank you for listening.